Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of World on Fire, a history of the Second World War. I am your host, as always, Nick Schweitzer. So, in this week's episode, we're going to be opening the conversation of some rather unmentioned parts of the war, and more specifically, the side of the war that we Americans tend to just kind of gloss over like it happened. Hey, there was like this whole thing in Europe. It's because we're talking about the Pacific. Now, as I stated in my last episode, at the very end of it, this is where my love for the subject started. And it is the heaviest amount of my research in graduate school. It was basically all focused on the Pacific Theater. I fell in love with it and just kind of made that my focal point. I originally had, I had a decent amount of knowledge, but nowhere along my journey, I stumbled across some things that really just kind of made me, as a historian, say, "Wow." Anyway, so I was obviously I was wrapped in the brutality and the degradation of morality, especially as Marines and soldiers hopped from one island to the next, getting closer and closer to the mainland of Japan. We're going to get into that in a little bit. As a forewarning, my passion for the Pacific. I do not sugarcoat, nor do I realistically, honestly care about how grotesque the information may be received. Mind you, war is a literal deadly game of attrition. And as we will find out in our conversations over this Pacific theater, the United States Marine Corps, the Imperial Japanese military, and the islands involved were going to learn that the fighting was beyond anything the Western powers had faced to this point. There was no surrender, no falling back. It was a serious gridlock of human bodies, and the winner would be the one who would kill all of their enemy on the islands. As always, before we get into too many details here, I wanted to give a quick shout out, as always, to our partners at the History List and Might and Fury World War II. The holidays are upon us. It's kind of gross. 2 years went by incredibly quick, and buying for a history nerd can be painful. Trust me, I try buying for myself, and unless it totally captures the historical moment perfectly and the details are accurate, I don't want it. But thankfully, both of these companies have you covered with a great variety of apparel and gear. They are guaranteed to have something you love. Make sure you guys are going on Kickstarter too, signing in and following Might and Fury World War II. They're nearing their 1,000 follower goal, which will place them in a position to launch successfully. That's what we want, right? We have the people. Go do it. Go support our community. Seriously, it's for free. You just go support them for free. It's super easy. It takes a few moments, and I can promise you that they have a fantastic and fun product coming our way. They seriously care so much that they sent me a video of them using a Heidelberg machine to print the card items that will be used in the game. For those of you that don't know what a Heidelberg machine is, go do some research, right? Their company's awesome. Or, well, they make awesome products, I should say. It's absolutely amazing, and if that doesn't tell you how much they care about the subject, then honestly, yeah, I don't know what you want. Good luck. This past weekend, I had a chance to actually spill some of my knowledge about our least favorite German industrialist, Gunther Quandt, and had a chance to share this content on an online forum. And when I say the literal explosion of listeners, followers, and supporters, it's really been almost overwhelming, but in a great way. If you are one of those fantastic people from Reddit that came over and stayed for the chats, gave recommendations, thank you. We are very close to being able to do some amazing things with this community and are starting to get interest from professors from around the world to come speak on this podcast. And it's all thanks to each and every single one of you. Because as I tell everyone, I'm just a dude talking about war. And with that, shall we darken the ambiance a little bit? It's time to hit the beach. Our first episode of the Pacific Theater, and the first of our new series over the Battle of Peleliu. But got one more thing, one more surprise. Uh, I want to explain why I waited as long as I did. Right? If you're such a fanatic, you love the study of the Pacific Theater. Why did you wait 6 months to dive into this? And I will tell you exactly why. And that is because of today's date, November 10th. Today is, in fact, the 248th birthday of the United States Marine Corps. Happy birthday, Marines. For those of you who are not of our American demographic of listeners, just a little brief. The United States Marine Corps is America's finest, smallest conventional fighting force we have. Born in a bar known as Tun Tavern on November 10th, 1775, as a means to place infantry-style troops aboard of naval vessels to not only board and defend against attackers, but also provide a fighting force that could land from the sea. That's going to be important for this episode. The United States Marine Corps earned their most notorious title during the First World War when men like John Daly and Chester Polar refused to surrender and turn back. During the Battle of Belleau Wood, a group of United States Marines were sent to aid their French counterparts. Led by 30-year-old Captain Lloyd W. Williams, the 5th Marines arrived under a hellacious nightmare. Instead of waiting by for orders, Williams began having his men set up firing positions and moving his men into offensive fighting fortifications. Seeing what the Marines were doing, a French colonel raced over to inform Williams he needed to prepare his men for retreat. What is he doing? In a sharp response without thinking, Williams responded, retreat. Hell, we just got here. The Marines would earn the namesake of Teufelhunden, or as we in English know it as the Devil Dogs during that fight. Fought bloody, hand-to-hand combat, and utilized incredibly aggressive fighting tactics to kill their enemy. By doing so, they put the entire world on notice. These Marines are some of the nastiest, bloodthirsty, and unapologetic fighting force in the entire world. And as Americans, we love them. This is important because during World War II, the Marines would be called upon to deal with the Imperial Japanese in the East, thus unleashing some of the most intense and deadly fighting World War II and history has ever seen. I'm an airman. I served in the United States Air Force. However, uh, the United States Marines deserve a lot of praise for what their role is in the United States, and especially in World War II. With that, tomorrow is also November 11th, which in the United States, we celebrate that as Veterans Day. In the other parts of the world, it's Remembrance Day. So for us Americans, that is in a sense a style-esque Memorial Day, and it really celebrates November 11th. Celebrates the end of the First World War. On November 11th, 11 a.m., all firing against all fronts ceased. And that is why November 11th is Remembrance Day. Started from the end of World War One. It was originally called Armistice Day, and it was actually celebrated as Armistice Day in the United States. Eisenhower changed it in the 50s to Veterans Day, and over a few countries have changed, and now it's just known as Remembrance Day, kind of against all of the victors of World War One. With that, I'll end my speech. Shut up. We'll get to what you guys are actually here for. For all those that have raised their hand, just as I did when I was 17, thank you. No matter what you did during your service, it mattered. We are thankful for each and every one of you, and every day that you've shown up. You're truly beacons in our communities, And for the rest of us, when we see a red poppy this weekend and you think of Flanders Fields, close your eyes, say a quick prayer to those that shall never grow old. Happy birthday, Marines. Happy Veterans Day, brothers and sisters. And always, always, always have a meaningful Remembrance Day. Peleliu, Peleliu, Peleliu. So, what what the hell is Peleliu? Or better yet, where is Peleliu? So, as I say at the end of my last episode, there's a ton of controversy around this specific island in battle, right? There are many historians and military tacticians that believe that this battle was totally unnecessary. However, I am not going to dive into that. I want you to all form your own opinion about this battle and to set the stage for us, right? It's early 1944, and by this point, the United States are more than just involved in the war. We are now one of the biggest players in the war. We're getting ready to start the liberation of Europe. We've already been in North Africa. We're in Sicily. There's a whole lot going on in the Pacific, right? Midway's already happened. There's a ton going on that the United States is directly involved in combat. So we've emerged as a major player, and so by 1944, we're really looking at within a year we're looking at the end of the war. So while a large majority of the country and the world, for that matter, are looking for that impending liberation attempt, right? We didn't know it was going to work. The attempt in Europe, but in the Pacific, it had already been a kind of a long and bloody battle, right? So as we know, the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, would be what launched us officially into the quote unquote fight. We'd been supporting for 2 years up to that point. We were involved, but this threw us into the fight. So I think about it in a sense of that the Imperial Japanese was the first enemy the United States took on. And it's the first enemy we actually fought. And it's important to understand the events that happened on December 7th. It was actually December 8th. A lot of people don't realize that the Japanese launched their attack on December 8th. However, time change. And so it was December 7th for us, December 8th. The Japanese didn't just take aim at the Pacific Fleet. It all was a very in-depth and intricate attack that expanded across the entirety of Southeast Asia. Not only did the Japanese reach all the way across the Pacific to hit the islands of Hawaii, they also attacked and captured Guam, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Seaport, and Malaya. The Dutch East Indies were also secured, which would provide oil for the Imperial Japanese military. So, by doing so, the Japanese were breaking their focus off of China, who they had been fighting, and began focusing on occupying all of Southeast Asia. They knew that they didn't have the resources. Japan's not an overly resource heavy country, so they need to seek elsewhere. The Dutch East Indies are packed with oil, so it made sense when you need oil to, have a moving military. Having a fighting military is one of the key components. So they broke away from their. That kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, that sounds like some guy in Germany tried to do something similar. Anywho, by breaking their focus off China, right, and they focus on Southeast Asia, we got to remember that this wasn't like a new war for the Japanese and the Chinese, right? The Second Sino-Japanese War had been going on since 1937, and that started with the Manchukuo incident. And we are going to dive all up into that, but certainly not in this episode because it takes forever. The Manchukuo incident is what we like to call a red flag incident. They faked it. Japanese faked it so they could go to war with China. But like I said, we're going to get into that later. So it's important it's an important piece of this attack. All of it, right? It's the Philippines, right? I said they took over the Philippines. More importantly, one dude, U.S. Army General Douglas MacArthur. He's important in all of this. MacArthur is a pretty renowned general, especially in the case of World War II. Is your typical protege, right, of military leadership, as he was the child of Lieutenant General Arthur MacArthur. I mean, come on now. Arthur. Sounds like I'm making it up. He was a Medal of Honor recipient of the Civil War. Also, and more importantly, he was the third military governor of the Philippines. This is his dad. Douglas, however, would go on to attend West Point and have a phenomenal career in the Army. It was, however, during his time in the Army that he himself returned to the Philippines with his men and basically more or less integrated his troops. MacArthur would even be promoted to Field Marshal in the Philippine Army. And on December 7th, December 8th, the attacks, the Japanese would surround the Philippine American coalition troops and force them into surrender. MacArthur would escape, vowing his infamous, "We shall return." This is a major defeat, not just to the United States, but it was damaging to General MacArthur. And by 1944, the Philippines were still in Japanese control. But the Americans were starting to pick up some steam in the Pacific. See, now they had developed a newly designed campaign, right? It's called leapfrogging, and it would turn out to be an immaculate success. It was, however, met with a ton of resistance. The leapfrog idea should not be confused with island hopping. I know a lot of people are like, Nick, it's island hopping. No, they're two separate ideas, right? Think of it as leapfrogging would bypass heavily fortified beaches and hitting smaller targets. Island hopping was kind of the complete opposite. They didn't care about the smaller ones. They just wanted the meat and potatoes, right? They were going after the big boys. They were going for Okinawa. They were heading straight for the main Japanese forces. The plan would be something that no modern military had truly, really ever attempted. The Navy and Army set out to select islands across the Pacific that were light and moderately defended by the Japanese. Plain and simple, right? Each island they took would become the next staging ground for the next assault on the next island, hopping closer and closer and closer to mainland Japan until whoop, you're in Japan. With the oversight of Admiral of the Pacific Fleet, that would be Admiral Chester Nimitz, MacArthur, and with commander of the South Pacific Area Carrier Fleet, Admiral Bill Halsey, they devised a plan that would ultimately create the largest window of opportunity to make it to mainland Japan. While these three leapfrogging operations, if you will, would take place, Nimitz was well into his island hopping campaign in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. So in November of 1943, the 2nd Marine Division, under the command of one of my favorite generals of all time, General Holland Howland Mad Smith, landed at the island of Tarawa. Right away, the more heavily defended beach and a horrible landing issue. For those of you that don't know, at Tarawa, they basically got stuck way too far out into the surf. So if dudes weren't drowning, they was like open season on them. Because they had such a large amount of distance to travel, and they're wading through, waist deep water. It was insane. So with this, 1,000 Marines would lose their lives in 3 days. No, it's in the same breath, right? You're like, geez. 3,000 Japanese would also be killed in that 3 days. At the same time, the 2nd Marine Division was hitting Tarawa. The United States Army's 27th Infantry Division would be landing at Macon Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. They would, in fact, win the battle, but lose double the amount of the men that the Japanese did. So Operation Cartwheel is the first of the three major leapfrogging operations across the Pacific, right? This operation would see that MacArthur and his forces moving to the northeast coast of New Guinea, securing Islands and that entire area, and Halsey would take his men through the Solomon Islands, where their main target would be Bougainville in late 1943. So it's important to know why this area, instead of being closer to Japan, why are we looking at this, right? So it's not really close to Japan. Uh, New Guinea is really damn close to Australia, and more importantly, Rabaul is it's gross. I could see why the Australians were scared. Cape Gloucester on New Britain and Bougainville would be the beginning signs of how bloody the Pacific would become. While the Americans would only lose 727 men in the Australians, because you know they were there too. Shout out to my Australians. Uh, they put up a good fight too, and they lost 516 of their men. However, they would have to kill nearly every single one of the 20,000 Japanese to secure the island. New Gloucester would be similar. 310 Marines killed and roughly 2,000 Japanese in only 20 days. At the same time Operation Cartwheel's happening, Operation Reckless starts. MacArthur and Halsey, at the same exact time of Operation Reckless, MacArthur and Halsey also launched Operation Persecution. That was to initially knock the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy out of New Guinea and to take strategic airstrips known as Itate and Taji. Once again, believe it or not, worked like a charm, right? And the Americans were able to walk away with only 19 men killed. Incredibly successful operation for any military fighting force. So in the three operations that composed of the New Guinea campaign, it would cost about 20,000 American and Australian forces total. With that, so I know you're probably like, math don't math. There were some other things going on. There were naval battles. And I'm talking in total, whole New Guinea campaign to knock them away from Australia. 20,000 American and Australian troops would be killed. But for the Japanese, it was a lot more. It was 202,000 men were killed. That's staggering. But somehow this push had worked, right? The leapfrogging tactic had worked, successfully pushed back the Japanese back, and they were no longer an imminent threat to the Australians. Operation Reckless, which would follow directly after, all the way to D-Day in June of 1944. Right, they're kind of launched simultaneously, a Reckless and Persecution. But Reckless would kind of last all the way until D-Day in June of 1944. So it was a longer mission, and it was focused on taking back the Dutch East Indies. If you remember what I said earlier, this is a critical area, and it was basically resource banks for the military. That was a great success as well. So Operation Reckless, Operation Persecution, and Operation Cartwheel, all three have been a success. The reason why it ended on June 6th is because of D-Day. That's it. You need to think that U.S. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall seriously didn't care about the Pacific. For him, he wanted to take the fight 100% to the Nazis in Europe. He viewed the Japanese as completely inferior. So he was like, they're not as big of a threat as the Nazis. So, George C. Marshall just kind of like blew it under the table. So once the liberation of Europe kicks off in June, right, resources and the timing of things in the Pacific began to slow down. Right, everything was now secondary to what was taking place in Europe. But Nimitz didn't care. Really didn't. The Americans not only needed to put the pressure on Japan, but they couldn't wait any longer, right? They knew that it was now or never. It was time to move into the pink zone of their plan. So each stage of the moving closer to Japan, they would have different levels of, okay, by here in pink zone, we need to be here by September of 44. red zone, white zone, orange zone, and that's not in order, but that's how they measured their performance in the Pacific through these zones. And the pink zone is what we're getting ready to find out about. Immediately after the leapfrogging success, the clearing out of the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, the Japanese were basically in some serious trouble. The only non-territorial areas the Japanese now occupied in the South Pacific would be that of the Caroline Islands, the Philippines, the Palau Islands, and the Mariana Islands. And this is where we see the heads begin to butt together, right? MacArthur is very focused on taking the Philippines back, and they are purposefully planning battles and routes that will get his men into position in order to liberate the Philippines. Funny enough, during the Cairo Conference in November of 1943, MacArthur openly and deliberately fought against the ideas of taking Saipan first due to being close enough proximity to mainland Japan, right? He was arguing that well, I don't care, Saipan's closer to, mainland Japan. He said that he openly, the United States were going to land at Saipan to place their B-29s there so they could do bombing raids on to the Japanese islands. MacArthur didn't care and said it would be nothing, that he would not do anything purposefully taking him away or delaying his return to the Philippines. Okay, so he's admitting it. So now we're on a drive to making sure that MacArthur keeps his word. Ultimate idea here should be to do whatever it takes to end the war the fastest. And George C. Marshall, Chester Nimitz come to an agreement that to go through Saipan into Okinawa, followed by the invasion of mainland Japan. Right, 1, 2, 3. Right there is Saipan, Okinawa, Japan. Those three in order. However, this is the thing that Douglas MacArthur threw a fit about, right? He threw such a big enough fit that his complaint flew past the desk of Secretary of War Henry Stimson and straight to the desk of President Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt personally flew himself to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in order to speak with both men in regards to the opposition and plans of how the U.S. should continue the Pacific, right? So Nimitz and Marshall agree, right? Saipan, Okinawa, Japan. This is their plan. MacArthur's is a little different, right? He thinks that they should take the Philippines before they take Japan. He thinks they should take the Philippines before they take Saipan. So Roosevelt flies out, talks to both of them, and Roosevelt actually sides with MacArthur on taking back the Philippines, right? By doing so, the Americans would no longer just be taking the Mariana Islands, but the Palau Islands as well. Now, this creates a stepping stone for MacArthur to get back to and liberate the Philippines and provide a defensive eastern flank to the fleet heading towards the Marianas and provide a western flank to MacArthur's men making their way to the Philippines. The stage is now set to make a push towards the mainland of Japan. It's from this point out where the battles go from a horrible human situation to full-blown eradicating your enemy no matter what. So on June 15th, 1944, just 9 days after the United States Army lands in Europe, the United States Marine Corps' 5th Amphibious Corps, commanded by our friend Howland Mad Smith, lands on the beach of Saipan. In all, around 71,000 Marines would hit wave after wave against staunch resistance of 25,000 embedded Japanese occupiers, and the battle was a long 24 days, leaving over 3,000 Marines dead, and nearly every single defender on the island, all 25,000, would either be killed by their attackers or commit suicide rather than being captured. Less than 2,000 would surrender. I think the number is like 1,812 men. Could be wrong there, but an incredibly small number considering. So the rest were killed. It was actually after this battle that Emperor Hirohito would he would leave the Japanese archipelago in order to stay the hell away from the B-29s that would be landing there in Saipan to go bomb Japan. So on the 21st of July, 57,000 men of the 3rd Amphibious Corps, along with the 77th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, under command of Marine General Roy Geiger. Little fun fact. He is the first Marine to ever command a field army. Now you know. He would land just east of Saipan at Guam, facing about 14,000 Japanese defenders. And just like Saipan, after 20 days, around 1,600 Marines and 200 soldiers were killed. For the Japanese, it's another totally devastating blow. Only 88 of the 14,000 men would surrender. The 29th Infantry Division of the Imperial Army is now crippled. Right? To lose that many men is absurd. So, in just 3 days after the opening attack on Guam, Howland Mads Smith and his 5th Amphibious Corps would hit the beaches of Tinian with over 41,000 Marines to face off against a defending force of a little over 8,000 men. And just in 8 days, there would be only 404 Japanese soldiers on the island that would surrender. The Marines only lost 368. Right, so the percentage of Japanese soldiers are shrinking a lot. They're fighting to the death, and as we get further into this, and in our next episode, we're really going to talk about it. They didn't have an option. Okay. After a month, the Mariana Islands are now secured, and B-29s begin to run operations off their airfields, just like they wanted. And then the eyes look back east at the Palau Islands. President Franklin Roosevelt has tabbed the 1st Infantry Division of the 3rd Amphibious Corps, led by Marine Corps General William Rupertus, to take the small island known as Peleliu. Peleliu is a small 5-square-mile island on the far southeast end of the Palau Islands, which stands out as it's relatively flat. It does have some mountains called the Umbergol Mountains. We'll get into that in a little bit. But, it's got that, and it's got a working airfield. It's small. 5 square miles is small. MacArthur views this as a fantastic place to stage his bombers for not just the attack on the Philippines, but also for Okinawa. It's really for the Philippines. It's kind of like, oh, I want to go get ice cream, but, I'll get you something too. He was doing it for the Philippines. Something would be a little bit different than before, though, right? Leapfrogging, kind of bloody. Or island hopping, my bad. Island hopping, kind of bloody. Leapfrogging, kind of bloody. This step towards the Philippines is going to totally change the game. You see, Imperial Japanese Colonel Kunio Nakagawa was a student of war. And after he saw how other Japanese commanders and units had fared in the Solomon, Gilbert's, and Marshall Island campaigns, he realized that the Americans would utilize a near scorched earth tactic to beat their enemy into submission. Constant day in, day out naval shelling would be the preparation for the landings, right? Tens of thousands of naval artillery shells would hammer an island before the first wave of Marines would arrive. Now, Nakagawa has roughly 11,000 men under his command, and he re-alters his defensive position just in case of an attack. And he would be right. He took most of his forces into the Umbergol Mountain, the mountain range, via tunnels, nearly 500 limestone caves along the mountain. Within these caves would be hundreds of artillery pieces and tunnels branching out all over the islands to give protection from machine gun nests. The defenders could easily get to any point on the island. These trenches are massively expansive. 5 square miles. I mean, these dudes are able to get anywhere relatively quickly. Instead of taking the fight directly to the Marines when they landed on the beach, Nakagawa was going to hold his fire until the very last minute, hoping to gather as many unsuspecting enemies on the beach and also crowd the boat traffic, right? Cause panic, cause issues, just boost the casualties even more. All of his firepower is really in the Umbergol Mountains. He was waiting for them before that mountain range erupted, if you will. And obstacles were also placed all over the beach, nearly forcing all of the attackers to go into something known as a fatal funnel. For those of you who have no idea what the hell a fatal funnel is, imagine if you were in a hallway and there's a T at the end of it. There's no doors down the hallways, or the doors are shut. Now, imagine someone turns the corner of that T looking directly at you, and they're holding a gun. Where are you going to go? Forward, backward, side to side? You're screwed. It's a fatal funnel. So they have funneled you into your death, if you will. And this is exactly what the Japanese were planning to do on the beach with their obstacles. And because they would be a length of time between the Marianas campaign and the Palau campaign, they would be able to perfect these defenses and just wait. They didn't need to rush. So on September 15th, 1944, at 08:32, after constant shelling from the night before, the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marines landed at their designated beaches preparing for a fight for their life when the ramp doors dropped. Rather find their enemy, all they saw was black, scorched earth smoldering from shelling. There were no victims, dead bodies, nothing. They were totally unopposed. As wave after wave of Marines filled the beaches and more boat traffic started coming up, Nakagawa gave the order and the Umbergulls erupted. So a stopping point, right? So in our next episode, we're going to expand so much on this battle. We're going to dive into what happened after Nakagawa gave that order, how many Marines would be killed, and what about the Japanese? How long would it take? And ultimately, the greatest question of us all, were the lives worth it in the long run? Thank you all so much for listening. I love being able to come here on this platform and just talk. It's great to see this community grow so much over the past few months, and I seriously cannot wait to see where it takes us. Make sure you hit us up on all of the socials by searching World on Fire Podcast. Come buy me a coffee on Patreon so I can keep the late night research sessions going. Leave us a like and review anywhere you listen to your podcast. Thanks again, everyone, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.